too. All right, good morning and welcome to the Board of Education's first FY 2026 operating budget work session. I'm going to do a roll call to establish a quorum. I'm going to start from my left.
Pernille Suvarna, student member of the board, excited to be at my first operating budget work session.
Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. Carla Silvestre, school board member at large.
Good morning, buenos dias. Grace Rivera Oven, District 1.
Good morning, Brenda Wolf, District 5.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for watching at home. Rita Montoya at large.
Good morning, Laura Stewart here, District 4. Welcome to Operating Budget Palooza.
Good morning, Julie Yang, District 3. All right, may I have a motion to approve the agenda for today?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. That's unanimous with those present. All right, so before we begin today's important budget conversation, I want to take a moment to highlight this board's commitment to ensuring that our schools remain a place of opportunity, growth, and support for all. And creating a budget is more than just crunching numbers. It's about investing in the future and strengthening our programs. This process reflects our values and the hard work and dedication of this board, the administration, and all the staff in our school system. We remain committed to making informed, thoughtful decisions that serve the best interests of our district and uphold the trust that you, the community, have placed in us. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to a productive and collaborative discussion. Today, our topic is MCPS revenue and non-discretionary requirements, an overview of the blueprint. Staff should point out pertinent issues that may concern the board. As always, board members are free to ask questions at any point. Now, due to the large quantity of the information, I would like board members to focus on questions that will help you make decisions for this budget. A second work session will be held on January 22nd, and our third and final work session will be held Monday, January 30th. In addition, the board will have 2 budget hearings and 3 other budget community information sessions. The first hearing will be on January 16, 2025, and the second hearing is on January 27. Both hearings begins at 6 p.m. I want to remind everyone that board is scheduled to take tentative action on the proposed budget in February. Now, Dr. Taylor, do you have any comments before we begin today's conversation?
Just really excited to be here and look forward to a rich discussion and some thoughts and direction from the board.
All right, so then let's begin.
Thank you so much. This morning, I'm standing in for our CFO, who's away on family business today. And we've got a number of guests who are also with me today who will chime in depending on some of the questions that the board may ask. We're going to give a very brief overview and give you some highlights of some of the changes that are listed in terms of revenue, as well as some of the changes that are listed for non-discretionary requirements in the budget, in addition to the blueprint. So some really exciting topics for today. Kind of said that as a little humorous. Maybe I'll get a smile. Okay, very good. But we will dive into some really important topics this morning. Just as a reminder, this is not a budget of cake. This is very much a budget of vegetables and some tough things that we need to address. Not a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today are super exciting. There's many things that are actually quite frustrating in this particular budget that we have to address, but we have to address them. And they are going to be persistent challenges that we have to deal with for the next several years. I really appreciate the Board of Education and the guidance that you gave me very early on in terms of setting the stage for this budget process. You made it easy for me, actually, to hone in on some of the community feedback that we've received already and how we might create the conditions to move the MCPS forward. So this budget is really about a handful of things, and to distill this down to a handful of things and to give it meaning to our community, this budget is about focusing our energies and efforts into supporting schools, making sure that we are taking care of what happens in the classroom, being very focused on our fundamentals and the things that we know work, exhibiting good fiscal stewardship, and then sharing out in a very transparent way. I'm very proud that yesterday we took our very robust Table 1A document and online. We updated this document yesterday and sent out notice to this effect when we did the original budget presentation as well, that we added exhibits so that our public can kind of drill down on each individual line and see what comprises some of the numbers that apprise in the budget. This is new. This is a new level of transparency for MCPS, and we are thrilled to bring that forward. This first work session, as we pointed out, is largely about revenues, about blueprint expenditures and non-discretionary expenditures. And to translate a little bit of that, our non-discretionary expenditures are the things that are tied to contract, tied to law, tied to policy and regulation. And then, of course, robust board questions, answers, and discussion. Our next board work session will focus largely on discretionary expenditures and more board Q&A. And then our final work session talk about changes to our base budget reorganization and close out our budget discussion and giving direction to the superintendent and staff on what the final budget adoption should look like on the board's behalf. So just to revisit very briefly, our strategy, our approach. Our approach is very much focused on a handful of things that we aim to do in this budget to leverage better outcomes for our students and for our community. We do need to return to higher expectations for academic excellence. We do need to invest in our team. We need to have learning environments that are safe, welcoming, supportive, and inclusive. We need to have systems, structures, and processes that make for a continuous improvement environment. We need to provide a different level and layer of support than what we have been doing already for schools. We need to organize in a way that supports our schools. And we need to recognize that not every student who walks into our schoolhouses comes with the same toolkit when they show up, and that we need to adjust our approach to meet the needs of our various learners. And then finally, we need to have a big old plate of fiscal vegetables. We need to have some discipline and some internal controls on how we manage our money and how we plan for the managing of our money over a multi-year period of time. That recipe is simple, and it brings us to our revenue picture and what we are looking for and what our request is. I will say that there are a lot of variables on this page, and that in the past we would have a much clearer picture of what some of these variables might look like, and we don't. There is actually a lot of question marks that lay ahead both in the federal landscape. Granted, the federal fiscal calendar is a calendar that starts January to December, and our budget calendar is July to June. But looking ahead at what our fiscal landscape might look like at the federal level has some question marks. The governor is set to release his budget proposal very soon as well. That should also illuminate some of our revenue picture. And then, of course, our county government has its process once the board concludes with your process. We have a number of things to keep in mind as we are trying to put forward a proposal that both meets our needs and also lives within our means at the same time. Going into a little bit more detail, you'll see that by comparison from last year to this year, we are projecting a decrease in federal revenue. a slight increase in state revenue, and a very significant increase in local revenue. All of this is subject to change. As I mentioned earlier, and just as an artifact for our friends that are viewing at home, that we are looking very intently at things that are happening at the state, federal, and local levels, and the decisions that are made in Annapolis, the decisions that are made in Washington, and of course the decisions that are made in Rockville that have an impact on our revenue picture. Looking at our blueprint, which is a big component of our budget and is a focal point of this year because we have expansion that is planned tied to the blueprint, and particularly in pillar number 1, which is early childhood education, as well as meeting the National Board Certified Teacher requirements in pillar 2, and some of our college and career readiness assessment requirements in pillar 3. We do have some expenditures that are tied to the blueprint this year that are planned. Our current totals that we have committed to blueprint expenditures reflect $30.1 million. Now, I will say that is in addition to some of our already existing operations, that if we were to tie much of what we do in terms of college and career readiness, that number is actually much, much bigger because we have a lot of our existing efforts prior to the blueprint's conception that are also reflected in our blueprint outlook. Some things that we are still looking for some clarity from the state about have to do with the regulations and roles that different state entities have in terms of blueprint. There seems to be a lot that's still in the air, and there is also some advocacy, even in the board's legislative agenda, about addressing some of the things that we think could be tightened up a little bit tied to blueprint. When we look at our expenditures this year and what we have proposed, we are looking at the potential of adding 13 general education and 15 special education classrooms, in addition to 10 special education collaborative classrooms into our early childhood mix. This is both really exciting, a tremendous and positive investment for our community, but it also comes at a significant expense. Moving on to the next focal point, and this may actually be a good time to pause if you want, Madam President, to have a discussion about the blueprint components. And we could kind of go back and hit the next section if you want. Janine, of course, is here, our blueprint director and resident expert. And there are also some materials at your desk that reflect some of our blueprint outlay as well.
I do think this is a good place. I'm going to turn to my colleagues to see if there are any questions. And when we come to the staff, before you answer the question, introduce yourself. Okay, I'm going to start from the right-hand side. Board Member Stewart.
Hello, Laura Stewart here. I needed to know more about the blueprint. I see the money that came in from state aid, $39 million, and I see that we had the $30.1 million that you mentioned on your slide. I'm a little unclear. How much are we spending above the state aid for blueprint?
Go for it.
I think that we have some ongoing costs that actually haven't been completely tallied. So when we look at the 30 million, we're talking about things that we absolutely need to do in terms of mandates. But some of these pieces have been in place over the last several years. So there have been some ongoing costs that are associated with the implementation of the blueprint because it's a state law. So I would say it's much more than that. I don't have the exact amounts right now.
And just as one illustration, for example, one of the requirements of Blueprint was an adjustment to the salary scale for starting teachers. That, for example, so some of those like big embedded pieces don't necessarily stand out. These really are the more sort of discrete requirements, as Janine was mentioning. And as Dr. Taylor said, we really have a lot of our ongoing work that is either pre-existing or responsive to Blueprint, but was not necessarily a specific add-on for a specific piece. So this is really sort of an enumeration. And those Blueprint dollars from the state also support some of the very specific restricted funds, such as community schools, right? So there are a number of layers to that, to those aspects as well.
So, Ms. Stewart, I think I actually sent an email to the administration asking for a more detailed number, and we will be able to share once we get that number.
Well, and it's an interesting question, too, for a couple of reasons, because we compensate, in the compensation question, there's an expectation in the Blueprint that we compensate teachers at a starting salary above $60,000. Well, we do that. We are one of the few districts in Maryland that does. And so the question then comes, would we be doing that anyway because the labor market directs that, or are we tying that back to Blueprint? And it's a gray area. So it's hard for us to discern whether or not that is a Blueprint expense and the expense of that difference between $59,999 versus when we've crossed that threshold, every nickel beyond that, does that then now be tied to Blueprint, or is that just us meeting the labor market demand?
I think there's probably a way for instance, we know that we were already going to pay our teachers a premium. But some of the other areas are a little more gray, I feel. So yeah, I'm trying to determine how much of the unfunded mandates do we have? So anyway, that's where I'm thinking.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide another example of that under the teacher compensation. Between 2019 and 2024, we were required to increase teachers' salaries by 10%. So would there likely be some teacher increase during that period of time? Yes. Would it have achieved the 10%? I'm not sure, but we were mandated to do that. I think the other thing is that Montgomery County is also subject to the wealth equalization, and because we've had a few increases in wealth in the county, then our share becomes larger. I think on average, the pre-K is funded by the state at about 30% of what those costs are, and then the teacher compensation at about 36%. So there is a local and state share, but our share is sometimes much greater than it might be in other jurisdictions. And so that those account for some of those additional costs. But I think there's a way that we can work to be able to calculate that. But I would say that that's the case across all of the pillars. So when you look at what we discretely have to do from year to year, and then what we've done over a period of time, I would calculate that as a much greater amount. But I think we can work to determine an approximate cost.
Those numbers you just gave help us have a fuller picture, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Montour?
Thank you for with the percentage breakdown. That was actually really helpful, and that was one of my questions as well. So thank you. And if you have any more information like that, that would be really helpful for us. In regards to, on your slide, so two things. You said that there's a possible major reduction in state funding, so I'd like to learn a little bit more about that.
Yes, there is. We've just started the new legislative session for 2026, and the governor has proposed that we freeze for 4 years the collaborative teaching time portion or requirement of the Blueprint, that those funds would be frozen for the next 4 years. The Accountability and Implementation Board, which is the entity that oversees the Blueprint and has jurisdiction over MSDE concerning the Blueprint, has also published a statement that is very closely aligned with what the governor's recommendation is. So essentially, what it is saying is that the amount of funds that would be given to each school district for the teacher collaborative time is estimated to be calculated at approximately $163 times your student enrollment. So for MCPS, if we have an enrollment of approximately 155,000, there is a potential for us to have a reduction of $25 million. So we don't know what the legislative outcome is going to be. We're still also waiting this week to see what the governor releases in his budget, but there is a potential for us to lose $25 million. And I think MCPS over the last few years, and including this year, has really invested a lot of time and energy on this topic of teacher planning and working with MCEA. And so the potential impact on us in terms of our efforts, our existing efforts for teacher collaborative work, as well as the impact on the foundation funding formulas could be significant. So there is a likelihood that that will happen, but we don't know until the session plays itself out.
Okay, and so do we, if that happens, do we know then how we're going to move these things around? Because even if we've already been doing that, we can't then just say, well, it's on pause now. That in itself could be disruptive.
It could be, and I think they've just put this plan out for this week. So I think, as we have had to do in past years, we'll have to sort of regroup, recalibrate, make sure that we are in compliance with what the state requires of us. Also, how that will impact our potential planning for the rollout of a career ladder level 4 that leads to teacher lead positions as well as administrators. We'll have to reconsider all of that and take a look at that and sort of regroup our plan for meeting those requirements.
Okay, and then I have one question about the IB fees. Do we have any information about how many of those students whose fees are being paid for by MCPS, or even for dual enrollment as well, are farms versus non-farms? And then also, and it could be by percentage if you'd like, how much percent of the funding of that is the state covering? Because that is something we are required to do by state law, right?
Thanks. Oh, we are required to do that by state law. I believe that we can get the numbers to determine how many of those students are eligible for free and reduced meals services. But the state law requires that we cover, currently it requires that we cover all of the costs for those students who are eligible for the AP, IB, and dual enrollment. So the state provides a certain allocation and they have sort of an estimated number, but anything that exceeds that or any additional costs that we may have are funds that MCPS has to provide in order to meet that mandate. It is quite a large amount.
And how much, I guess that's what I'm wondering, like even if it's just a ballpark, I'd like to know how much, kind of what Ms. Stewart's question was, is how much is unfunded, right? We're required to do this, but how much are we having to come up with on our own?
So a couple of things. This is also something that's a part of the board's legislative agenda at the State House, and it is one of your legislative priorities that we have the flexibility to address this and differentiate our approach to funding. This is reflected as a $2.1 million increase in what we currently expend for AP IB testing fees. It's important to note, too, that there are some inadvertent pieces that kind of come with this because there is an expectation that students that take these assessments, that they register in the fall. And sometimes those students don't fulfill that expectation in the spring, and that we are on the hook for the cost as well without a lot of recourse. So us adjusting that expectation and us complying and having different guidelines might actually be a huge relief to us and create some financial benefit.
Okay. And I'd like to hear, too, and it doesn't have to be right now, but also then about how much, again, ballpark, are we losing to students that are registering and then not, that don't end up taking the test? Thank you.
All right, I want to, in the interest of time, let's each have one question first. If we have additional time, then we will come back. Thank you. Ms. Moore.
No, that's a little bit unfair at this
I know.
point in time.
Yes, I understand that. I understand that.
I'm going to ask what I really didn't have a question, but I wanted Janine to talk about the philosophy of the AIB, because I think that will help people understand that there are a lot of unfunded mandates here. We don't have answers. Every district is complaining about the same thing. And until the legislators start talking about it, we won't have any real ideas. But their belief is that the school systems have not been educating students the way they need to, and therefore they're going to take control. The difficulty is that they are not they're not in the counties working in the schools to know all the issues. They're sort of educational experts, but I think it would help, Janine, if you shared that the AIB really at this point isn't interested in whether or not we have the funds. They want this done.
Thank you for that comment. Good morning. I think you asked me to introduce myself earlier, Janine Backey, from the Blueprint office. I think that as I meet on a monthly basis with all of the other local school systems, all the other Blueprint staff, we have a running agenda of questions that we have regarding guidance or lack of guidance that we're getting from the Accountability and Implementation Board. And some of these questions have been on running lists that we've had for more than a year. Getting some of the guidance in a timely fashion and getting some of the guidance in a way that sort of explains exactly what we need to do has been a challenge. We received guidance last spring at the beginning of June. By the end of June, we had to submit career ladders level 1, 2, and 3. So it was a very short turnaround time for us to be able to make adjustments, for us to be able to negotiate with unions. And so it caused some difficulties. And for all of the pieces of the guidance that they provided, there were probably at least 5 or 6 questions that came back from the school districts asking them to sort of explain some of the guidance, or there were different scenarios based on how different systems have their contracts negotiated with their teachers. And so, again, we're having frustration with that. For example, we are supposed to be rolling out a Tier 2 for pre-K level next year, 300 to 600% at the poverty level for our pre-K students for a full day. We still have not received the guidance on that. Most school districts are starting their recruitment and enrollment processes in March. So in order to be able to implement that or to determine if parents whose income is above the state guidance would pay tuition, there's been no information on that. So one of the recommendations was that they put together a committee, and the committee would quickly make recommendations to roll out to us. We don't have any answers for that. Another example would be the waiver process for administrators. Should they have to receive their national board certification, or based on their experience and education and local training, would they be exempt from the NBCT process? And specifically asking for the correlation between the outcomes for NBCT and the administrative parallels. They're not going to address that for at least a year. We did just get some guidance regarding the pre-K paraeducation waiver, whether they have to have a child development associate's or an associate's degree. We've been asking for that for 2 years. So I think there's a lot of frustration, and the response really is we're going to have to meet these mandates. And there isn't one district in those conversations that isn't interested in meeting the mandates, that isn't interested in closing the achievement gap and moving our students forward in terms of wellness and achievement. But it's very difficult to do that if our hands are tied, because we need time to meet with various offices. It's certainly impactful for us in MCPS because we're the largest district in the state. So for the smaller ones and the very large ones, it presents even more of a challenge, because we have to, even for pre-K, it involves multiple offices, transportation, food services, facilities, in order to be able to implement these plans. So I just want to just reiterate and sort of corroborate what you're saying, that there are some frustrations. I also think that the AIB does rely on numerous experts that they bring in, and they cite a lot of educational research, which I think is important. But what it actually looks like on the ground in a school system in Maryland, it can be frustrating sometimes trying to work through all of these pieces and see how we can make all of that fit. So I think that's another challenge. And the response to that really is, it's a state mandate, you've got to meet it. So even when school systems propose some alternatives, what about this, can we do this or that, it's really, we're met with, you have to meet the mandate. If it's unfunded, they're saying you have to look in your budget and cut something else because you have to do these mandates. But school systems are saying we have fixed costs, we have transportation, we have fuel, we have heat. We're, gotcha. School systems are getting funds from their county government. Some of them are saying in order to implement this, it would compete with the funds that may go for transportation or fire or health department, something like that. So really, we have very little flexibility in being able to make any adjustments or to look at the timelines and suggest what is more reasonable. And I understand their concern. There's the urgency of now for our students, but there has to be some flexibility in how we're able to carry out these mandates with our other requirements.
I want to thank you for that, Janine, because we spend hours talking to the other 23 districts, and flexibility is the word that we're all going for. And so far, it's falling on deaf ears. So I just wanted you to share that so that people would know that we don't have a lot of opportunity here or even questions that we can really answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf. Ms. Rivera Owens.
Thanks, Jenny. Nice to see you. I also want to echo as somebody who sits on the MAVE Executive Committee. I hear this from the other counties, the lack of being able to do what you have. And our population numbers are very different to some other counties' population. So the way this was implemented was one glove size fits all. And we are finding out very quickly that that's not very well fitting for counties like Montgomery County. So with that being said, with the pre-K rollout that we're doing, I just want to make sure that the community understands, and folks who are funding MCPS, that there's a lot of things, like you said, only like 30% of it is going to be funded by the state, which means 70% of that has to be funded by us. So when we are, making now all those part-time positions into full-time, right, there's a lot of costs, including transportation, that comes along with it. And a lot of folks don't understand that pre-K transportation is not even part of the formula of the state. That we know the state only is required to fund transportation for kindergarten to 12th grade. So when we talk about pre-K and starting early, and we all know, right, and science supports it, and we have all this evidence of learning that when we start pre-K, the kids are much better off long term, but yet there's still, and this is something, that has to be made better at the state level, that they have to take into account the transportation, especially for counties like Montgomery County, is a huge part where we're going to have to do the funding on that. And like you said, it has to be done. And I think this is a frustration for a lot of counties. So with that being said, when I look at the college plus career readiness, pillar number 3, I think it would be also good to know, like in these pillars where we are doing the funding, it would be good to know how much of the funding that we're putting in to it is, so everybody knows exactly the cost to Montgomery County and the investment that we're putting in. And that, that dialogue has to be done, because I know we're having issues with community schools, with lack of flexibility on what some community schools can do based on our reality of Montgomery County versus the reality of another county that is, 10,000 students, right? So I know that the Blueprint Commission is looking at making changes, but like you said, it's very slow moving. We just got clarity on the waiver process for our paraeducators and whether or not they needed a degree, and that has a huge effect on rolling out all-day pre-K. Because then it's very hard to find providers with those qualifications. So these are things that I don't think we discuss very much, but I think it's important to tell the whole picture. So anything that you guys can give us that we can educate the public where we're doing these budget forums, because it just seems like, this is easy peasy and it's something that, it can be done, with a snap of fingers, but it's not. The process is kind of complicated and it's very unforgiving for flexibility. I think we had asked last time, the farm students who do AP and IB versus those who do not, to see if we can have some savings there. But again, even if we know that number, we cannot change the formula that the state gave us. We still have to pay for all. So that is, again, something that maybe our legislative friends and delegates and senators can actually take, and take that fight to Annapolis where it needs to be. But thank you.
Thank you. And I just say the board's legislative recommendation, I think that's in good company with what I hear from the other school districts who are, struggling to make decisions about funding, that for the families who are able to afford the dual enrollment and the others, then they should afford that. And then we should still have safety nets for students whose families are unable to afford it, because we don't want that to be a barrier to them to higher education. But clearly there are some families who could well afford it, and perhaps the cost savings could be redirected to another area of need. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sylvester?
Thank you. I have a comment and a question, and just want to reiterate what my colleagues have said about additional information so that we can show the public the full picture of the blueprint. What we have invested in past years, the percentages of local investment versus state investment, and then, of course, the ask that that is in this budget. I just think it's super important for the main reason which you stated, which is we are being asked to cut some fundamental things of teaching and learning in our budget to pay for new things that frankly have not been prioritized. It was do this, do that, do this. These are all great educational reform efforts, but they have not been prioritized. And we are now finding ourselves in a situation where things that we want to continue to expand, like pre-K, is coming at competing with other things that maybe could have waited a couple more years. So I just think it's important for the board and for the public to have a better picture of what the blueprint entails. And I think we have a council session still to be scheduled on this topic. Is that correct, Ms. McGuire?
Yes, the council will hear a report about this on the 28th.
20th?
28th.
28th, okay. So my question is about this, what you started out with, Ms. Bakke, about the collaborative planning time. I just need you to explain it to me, the implications for Montgomery County, because I didn't capture what you were saying. The state is going to delay it, and it's going to have implications for not this budget that we're working on now, but the next year's budget. But just help me understand, in layman's terms, what this means for Montgomery County.
There actually will be implications for this year's budget for FY26, and there is a potential for a loss of about $25 million.
In this budget,
Not FY25, FY26, excuse me, I'm sorry. The proposed budget.
Budget we're working on today.
The budget we're working on today, that's right. So the state requires under the blueprint that we develop a teacher and administrative career ladder. One aspect of that career ladder is that we develop a plan by this June that over several years, we allow for teachers to be teaching in the classroom 60% of the time, and then the other 40% of the time that they would spend tutoring students, working on the curriculum, conferring with other staff, meeting with parents, all of these things to support the student achievement and well-being. And so we have to have a plan in place by June 30th that incorporates this collaborative teaching planning time over a period of time. And we have to start to implement it next fall. So what happens is if the governor has proposed that we freeze that portion of the career ladder, the development of the collaborative planning time, and that those dollars also be removed from what each of the school districts is receiving. And so our existing efforts already with teacher collaborative planning time with our unions would be impacted by the loss of those funds, as well as our plans to roll out teacher collaborative time plan for the future. So we would have to sort of take a look at completing the development of the career ladder without that piece, but that's really an integral piece of what is the entire career ladder, that we're developing teacher leads, that then those teacher leads are mentoring other teachers, and they're working with them to develop them as teacher leaders and looking at ways that research-based ways to help support student achievement. So I think not only could there potentially be an impact in the work and how we develop the rest of career ladder level 4, but that $25 million, potential loss of $25 million would be significant because it would not allow us additional money for teachers and other resources in order to implement a strong teacher collaborative planning time. So it would impact us in a negative way, both in our planning as well as in our funding. And the $25 million is really significant.
Okay, thank you.
So at this moment, what Jeannie is talking about is the potential. It's not a done deal. We need to look at the governor's budget release and this legislative session. And in the past, it has been announced that 2026, 2027 blueprint money is safe. There has been conversations like that, but this is one area for us to keep an eye on because Montgomery County, we often are ahead of blueprint schedules. So this is a point that when we work with, the board, my colleagues work with state, we need to reiterate. Sometimes we are ahead of the times so that when they adjust, that they will take into consideration that people who are already underway with the work. All right, Mrs. Zimmerman.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. I have questions about community schools. It looks like we're projecting, it says 8 or more potential designations for community schools, correct? And then with grant money attached to that? Okay. So that $280,000, is that specifically for hiring community school liaisons and the nurses? Or is that for hiring across like community schools? We also then designate a parent community coordinator and a wellness trainer. Are those positions included in that? Does that money come from elsewhere? I'm curious.
We're inviting some audience friends to join us.
Oh, great.
Hi, Peggy Pugh, Chief Academic Officer. Community schools actually rolls in a phased-in approach. The first year, you're required to do the community school liaison and the nursing, and then it isn't until subsequent years that you get the per pupil allocation.
Okay. So adding in those other positions, are we expecting to do that for other schools in FY26? That how you're talking about that rolling in?
Yes, there are new schools added each year as the threshold of poverty that the state uses is determined, but they send us a list and say who's identified.
Right. So if we're projecting to identify, right, these schools, so I'm assuming there are other schools identified in FY25, and you're talking about that there's that rolling basis. So we're expecting that rolling basis. So we're expecting to hire, right, parent community coordinators and wellness trainers with that rolling in?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let's move on to the next section, please.
One quick question, channeling Ms. Harris. This was her question that she always asked. And that was about the utilization of our existing pre-K seats. She was under the impression that here we are expanding pre-K, but our pre-K our classrooms were not fully utilized. So I think that the issue was about the half-day programs versus the full-day programs, but would appreciate just some understanding. Are our full-day pre-K programs fully utilized in terms of capacity in the classroom, or is there space that is not being fully utilized? As we look to invest more in this, we want to make sure that families are utilizing the service and those classrooms are full.
Yeah, our full-day programs are fully utilized, and they're done also on a rolling basis. So if students drop, then we invite more students to the full day. The half-day programs are not fully enrolled because it's an inconvenience for families. The transportation is an issue. And so that's part of the design for the expansion, would be to take some of those half-day programs, make them full day, and be able to qualify for what is allowable under Blueprint. Blueprint, we do not get any funding for those programs that are half-day. We only get it for a full-day program. So rather than creating whole new programs, the idea is that we take a half-day program that's in a particular school, make 2 full-day, often there's not room for 2 full day in that same school, so some work with facilities is needed to be able to do it in a close area.
And will this finally get us out of the half-day program, or we'll still have, with this expansion in this budget, will we still have half-day programs out there?
We will still have half-day programs, mostly for our special education programs, for whom that's appropriate.
Okay.
And we still will have some that are non-special ed
Okay.
with this budget.
Thank you.
Ms. Rivera.
Just following up on that, is transportation going to be part of that transition? Because one of the biggest issues, even when parents were able to get full-day pre-K, but their pre-K was full in their home school, they were giving the option of going to another school, but they had to provide their own transportation, which created an equity issue. So now that we're transitioning all half-day to full-day pre-K, if that's the situation, are we going to provide transportation?
Yes, transportation is included in the budget for the expansion. It's still, you know, to your point, won't get us to every school, every local homeschool having a program, every student being able to go to their home school. So it is a very technical process to map out the bus routes and how to get them, and that's part of the consideration of location of where we put the programs.
Ms. Panu?
Yes, thank you. So I'm not expecting it now, but when possible, can we have the information on the number of half days that we have number of half day preschool or early childhood education things that we have right now versus the number that we expect in the future, so we can understand what the difference is, how many we're shifting from half day to full day? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Savannah. I know that each one of these chapters probably can be a full board meetings in discussion. So I want to remind my colleagues, focus your questions on that will help you make decision for this budget cycle. All right, let's proceed to the next chapter.
Sorry, I have one more follow-up question to what was...
Let's wait it to the end. At the very end, we still have discussion time. Thank you.
So the next section of our conversation has to do with our non-discretionary requirements and those kind of components that are, in fact, tied to the law, regulation, guidelines, or contracts that we have. And we're going to do our very best to take a lot of lines in the budget and give you them in smaller chunks. This is a summary by section of some of the things that we'll talk about. And so the very first one is compensation. And this is the biggest part of our budget request expansion, is looking at compensation. When you take a look at the big budget document, the Table 1A, this is reflective of lines 15 through 19, right up at the top. So we've kind of condensed that into one line for you to look at right there. These are placeholders for negotiated agreements with our associations, as well as encapsulating funds that we set aside for working conditions and stipends. But these are negotiated agreements that are not in place, and these are placeholder numbers for that, assuming some preliminary discussions around 3.25% plus a step, which is on par with what county government has made assumptions for FY26. This also reflects a reclassification of 2 employee groups, a reclassification of our athletic directors, or athletic specialists as they're called, and in our high schools, moving them from MCEA positions to MCAP positions, and also differentiating the compensation for our paraeducators because they have a variety of work assignments, but are compensated through one dimension at this time, and we would advise that we differentiate them differently in terms of how we compensate them in the future. So it's a good pause point, and this one's pretty easy and pretty big at the same time. Moving on to the next one has to do with fiscal stewardship. And a big priority that the board had laid out for me was for us to put ourselves back on the right track in terms of fiscal stewardship, making sure that we are covering our expenses and that we are financially solvent. This is reflected in a complex way, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about it. The first item here is our health benefits plan and making sure that as a self-funded health benefits program for our employees, that we are in the black. And presently, we are not. We do have a deficit that is reaching 60 million, and this is problematic. If we do not make changes to our structured plan, this is also something that does get negotiated with our association partners, we are going to find ourselves in trouble. And granted, this is a planned or a projected deficit. We do know that we need to make changes to our plan and that we also need to backfill the plan itself to make sure that we're solvent. It's a big chunk of change. This does not solve the problem. I want to reiterate that. It does not solve the problem. But it does put us on a pathway and the road to solving this over a 2-year period of time. Working with our partners and providers in terms of our health benefits, that is an acceptable solution, but we do need to focus and make sure that we have a plan that is solvent in the long run. This is one of those big fiscal vegetables that we need to take a look at. Probably the hardest thing to explain in the entire budget is salary lapse, because it is a $10 million increase to our fiscal control, but it's represented as a negative number. Currently, right now, you have $75 million committed to salary lapse, and what we are doing is reducing that salary lapse by $10 million, or what we are proposing that you reduce it. In a perfect world, you would have this be a zero number or a very small number. Salary lapse is taking into account that not every position in the district is filled at every pay period. And so you ask yourself the question, what on earth happens with those funds when they accumulate month after month when you have unfilled positions? And where does that money go? Well, it effectively is what becomes your fund balance over time. And if you had a $0 figure in your salary lapse, you would have a projected savings of around $75 million a year. That would be fantastic. That's enough to do a lot in terms of capital improvements, one-time expenses. You could use that for a whole host of things. That would actually be the sign of a really fiscally healthy organization. You shouldn't end a budget year with $0 in your bank account. Unfortunately, because of some of the tough decisions that you've had to make over the last couple of years, the board has leveraged some of its salary lapse to fill some of the holes in its budget. So you've encroached on that amount of money over the last several years, and now we need to start creating some fiscal controls to give us a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of room, because as we reported, sadly, earlier this year, we were projecting a deficit at one point because we had overextended ourselves in a number of budget categories. Thankfully, we are no longer projecting a budget deficit. That is thanks to us implementing some fiscal controls and the hard work of a lot of folks in our central office to tighten belts mid-year. But we need to be a little bit better with our planning. So this is really a function about how we plan and how we plan over time, multiple years. This is something that we'll have to come back and address next year. It is something that we'll have to come back and address the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that, and chip away at this block over time. How this became a big crisis is really twofold. The first issue that came about is that you are actually really well staffed this year. You actually have one of the highest staffing percentages that you've had in a really long time. We have filled a tremendous number of our vacancies, which has actually reduced our salary lapse. And that cushion has been eroded because we have filled so many of our positions. Unfortunately, one of the reasons that you have filled so many of your positions is because you had to cut vacant positions because of a budget shortfall last year. And so your fill rate is, in a lot of ways, artificially higher than it normally would be. And you have historically used salary lapse for other purposes in your budget, effectively double budgeting for the same dollar. This is just a practice that is accepted. It is a practice that is useful on a short-term basis, but on a long-term basis, this is one of those fiscal vegetables that we just need to eat and address a little bit more deliberately. We do have planned increases to our retiree plan. Our retirement plan is committed to the educators and staff who have given a lot to MCPS. And so making sure that we keep up with our premiums to that plan is particularly important. The next big section has to do with maintenance. Typically, how we have addressed maintenance in our budgets has been to look at some of the major capital projects and to address this through the capital improvements plan. And yes, we need to continue to do that. And yes, that is critically important. But there are ongoing maintenance needs that oftentimes get neglected. This really is a way more significant issue than we probably want to admit. This is upwards of $179 million that we should be budgeting for on an annual and ongoing basis for pay-as-you-go or pay-go maintenance needs. We have not really impacted our maintenance staff in terms of making increases to our maintenance staff over the last 20 years, yet we have added a number of new schools and millions of square feet to our footprint without increasing our maintenance staff or materials budget in that space. As a matter of fact, we have actually reduced our ongoing maintenance budget. Just so that we could balance the classroom needs. This is a pretty significant issue. We have heard from a number of our parents and from folks during the CIP process looking for relief for some significant capital needs. The reality is that many of the capital needs that they brought forward to us could have been fixed by ongoing maintenance and us being better stewards of our facilities. We do have an idea that we would like to approach, and that is to create some multidisciplinary teams of electricians, carpenters, painters, engineers and such to address and clear pending work orders at some of our more persistent schools, and for these teams to go out to sites and with the intention to plan and execute work. This is an effective strategy of preventive maintenance and to address ongoing maintenance needs that a lot of other school districts have adopted. It's high time that we address that, and we'd like to commit 22 personnel to that effort and feel like that would make a significant dent in some of our issues. We have programmed in at this time $7 million. Now, I mentioned just a moment ago that this is really a $179 million issue. This is really something that we'll need to come back and address for the next 10 to 12 years, every year, adding to a maintenance fund every year to build up so that we are keeping pace with the maintenance needs of all of our schools. One of the challenges that we have is that in the diversity of the portfolio of our buildings is that we have buildings at various states and various facility conditions, a lot of which is tied to age and also the building codes of the time that the buildings were built. And our newer buildings have very different needs than are some of our older buildings. And we need to have a diverse enough toolkit to address both of those things. And our portfolio of buildings is aging, and to maintain that is going to be a significant battle. We have some other annual costs that are worth some discussion and worth some evaluation, from transportation to building services staffing to facility costs. One of my favorite ones has to do with utilities. Our electric bill is not $6.1 million. It is much, much higher than that. We are set to realize actually a $4 million increase to our electric bill. That is an increase of $4 million to our electric bill. And then we have some anticipated costs to one of our energy savings contracts in the amount of $2 million that we are expecting this year as well. It is hard for a lot of people to fathom the size and scope of maintaining roughly 230 campuses. In addition to our school buildings, we also have buildings that we are maintaining for things like food service, technology, everything from printing to materials distribution, and even the building that we're in right now. And with that wide portfolio, we pay an electric bill just like everybody else, and it is millions of square feet a year. And so when we have an increase or a premium increase, and I think it was, I'm trying to get the percentage here, 8.5% increase to our utility costs, that is representative of $4 million just in increased costs to utilities. A couple of other big things that we are looking at, you may see system-wide safety appear in a couple of different places in our budget. The next budget work session, we'll talk about discretionary expenditures, where we talk about adding some security assistance to some of our schools. But we are also investing in how we might provide additional training and improvements to some of our systems and structures regarding safety. This is a high priority for the board and something that matters to us a great deal. Similarly, making sure that we are in adherence and compliance to the actual number of costs that are tied to our ADA compliance, that's the Americans with Disabilities Act, and making sure that we are fulfilling the actual costs of doing business, not just what the budgeted costs of doing business might be. I will say how important this is, because this is a particularly important fiscal vegetable. If we budget for an ADA line and we exceed that ADA line, that is not actually acceptable by law. So when we have an ADA expense that exceeds our budget, we are still expected to fulfill that. So it is in our best interest to communicate what our actual needs are in terms of ADA costs and our actual needs in terms of some of the other components that are listed here as well. You may or may not be aware, but we do have to work with financial institutions, especially financial institutions that are managing our funds as well, and we do have fees that are associated with that, and those are delineated, of course, in our macro budget on Table 1A as well. We also have some reporting expectations, as Ms. Backey pointed out just a few minutes ago. The expectations are quite extensive for Blueprint as well as for our state and federal governments. So when we have grant management and things that we need to do, we do require a lot of hands and a lot of effort to make sure that that paperwork is correct. One of the things that was a little bit of a surprise to me as somebody new to MCPS is how little support we had for grants and what we were doing to leverage additional monies outside of our current revenue mix. So adding 2 additional support positions for grants is a great way for us to leverage other revenue sources in the future, and we see this as a pretty compelling ask and potentially something that could pay for itself. Actually, it's our expectation that it pay for itself, even though it's listed as a debit on this particular component. We've gotten into some of the other fiscal vegetables that we have to eat. One of the bigger ones here is Chromebook repair. This is not a $4 million increase in Chromebook repair, but rather a reflection of what we actually spent. So this is the programmed projected cost. And again, we are no longer a one-to-one district in MCPS because we have not kept pace with our repair and replacement budget. And as a consequence of that, we do have some limitations. One of the questions that I enjoyed getting from some folks in the community is, why can't you just have a virtual day when it snows? And the reality is twofold. One, the state's expectations for virtual days has changed, and there are some restrictions and limitations. And then the second reason is not every student has a computer or access to a computer. And so we do have some limitations in that space. This is one of those components that in today's day and age, it is a competitive advantage for our children to have access to computer technology. It gives our kids a leg up and an opportunity for their learning environment, but it is an asset, and it is an asset that gets retired after 4 to 5 years of service, and we need to keep up with maintenance and replacement cycles, and if we don't, then we're only perpetuating inequities in our academic program. So this is one of those components that is a reflection of the true costs and not necessarily something that is an extension beyond what we are currently doing. Similarly, tuition reimbursement is one of those things. Presently, right now, we do have negotiated agreements with our associations that provide tuition reimbursement. We are short, and we have not budgeted accurately for the things that are in contractual agreements, and we do need to do a better job of that. So those are definitely things to highlight. One of the things that I picked up in having some conversations with our community during my entry was the lack of support that we are really engaging in terms of community engagement. And areas that we really do need to invest in to make sure that there's adequate interpretation and that there is support and recognition for our staff and the work that they are doing. And we fall short in many of these areas, and enhancing our interpretation and enhancing this space with a focus on community engagement would be a real uptick for MCPS. So I'm closing out here with just a couple of items that I want to draw your attention to, and one of the bigger ones has to do with staffing. We are projecting to be relatively flat in terms of our enrollment projection for next year. We are anticipating a little bit of a decline in elementary school and some increases in middle and high school. The net impact is 33.5 positions in terms of classroom positions, the way that falls, in terms of how that enrollment lays in terms of by school. The biggest staffing adjustment really has to do with special education and meeting our guidelines for special education. This is an area that really does need a tremendous amount of attention and does need a focus, and it is something that every meeting where I attend with parents gets brought up. Because we need to be providing services that are better than what we have been doing in the past. Our teachers and our paraeducators are working very hard, but we are falling short in meeting our own staffing guidelines. And so what does this look like? This looks like 188 teacher positions and 500 paraeducators. Of the 500 paraeducator positions, we already have 366 of which that are already part-time positions or temporary part-time positions that we would make benefited positions. One of the things that the board has already acutely observed is that this is a high turnover position. And it's a high turnover position for a couple of reasons. It's a high turnover position because the wages are not differentiated for the job assignment, and several of these positions are not benefited, 366 of them to be precise. So retaining this workforce and supporting this workforce that are in some pretty tough situations is a top priority for us, and making sure that we have what we need. Additionally, and I'll button this up pretty quickly, our fastest growing student population are our emergent multilingual learners. Making sure that we have adequate support and meeting our current staffing guidelines will have an impact. We seem to be playing catch up with this group of students in terms of meeting their needs, when really we just need to be proactive and forecast a little bit better about what the student population is. All of that to say that this does not reflect an enhancement to class size. It does not reflect an improvement to class ratios. That needs to happen, that needs to be a part of our future, that needs to be a part of our planning. Our budget request is very robust as it is right now. This will by far be one of the most expensive initiatives that we consider in the future, but it needs to be a part of our future planning. But before we can even get to improving our class ratios, we actually have to get to our class ratios. And this is a reflection of getting to our class ratios and actually staffing to the standards that we currently expect. Closing this out a little bit, we already know that we need to adjust our funds for materials and supplies that get allocated to schools, making some adjustments for things like paying for sports officials and maintaining our athletic fields and providing transportation. These are really just reflections of the true costs of doing things, and making sure that we are budgeting with a very transparent lens to actually have a number in the budget that reflects what we actually spend. To me, that is particularly important. You'll see also a reduction here. This is a reflection of the reduction in federal funds. So these things are aligned. You may recall that we mentioned earlier when we were talking about revenue that we were projecting a $5 million reduction in federal revenue. This is that $5 million reduction in federal revenue, and where this is aligned in terms of that space and how those funds have to be committed. So what on earth do we do in that space? Well, we have a number of choices. We backfill with local funds, or we align our programming to meet what the projection is. So closing out, the last couple of components here have to do with teaching and learning. One of our biggest investments last year was the CKLA curriculum, and launching our our elementary literacy improvements utilizing the science of reading, except that we did miss out on a couple of things. We did not provide print materials to all of our educators. We need to correct that. We need to make sure that all of our educators have the print materials that they need. We are also looking at secondary literacy and some STEM curriculum in this budget. It's time for those things. So to recap and to briefly talk a little bit about what we can expect in some of these non-discretionary requirements is that these are the things that are tied to law, policies, regulations, guidelines, and contracts. The vast majority of our budget requests are to represent the true cost of doing business, and to fill some of the holes that we have, and to address our fiscal position, and to provide solvency. Many of the things that you will see in this budget proposal are really just the beginning of really long-term, multi-year investments. But that is really what we need to do, is we need to think not just in one-year isolated points. Granted, the board can't hold future boards accountable to future budget decisions. That's not how this works, but you can plan ahead, and even though you can't hold future boards accountable, you absolutely does not absolve us of the responsibility to plan ahead. And so what we are targeting for this year is really to make some of these initial investments that will put us back on the path to fiscal solvency, and to give us a little bit more fiscal discipline, but also for us to plan and to design around how we can structure things a little bit better and a little bit differently in the future.
Thank you, Superintendent. Board member, now we can do questions. There are many chapters covered here, so we probably will go several rounds of questions. And each round, let's keep to 2 questions each board member first, then we'll come back. We have time for questions, and this is important. I would like you to be able to ask your question. I'm going to start with Mr. Savannah.
Yes, thank you. I see in our projected revenue, we have an increase from $1.1 million in state grants to $1.4 million. And then we also, like going back to one of the earlier slides, we had two more full-time positions dedicated to grant work. Is this like kind of that, like paying for itself that we expect to see within the projected in the revenue and then also within our full-time expenses?
Yeah, so a couple of things, and I'll let Ms. McGuire opine on some of this as well. Even though we would expect for grant positions to pay for themselves, so to speak, in terms of additional revenues that they could bring in, we still, from an accounting standpoint, have to represent the debit on our expenditure list. And so really what this should be as a budget is to represent a net position of expected revenues coming in and expected expenditures going out. And the number at the bottom of the page should always be 0 in terms of how we are planning for that. And even though additional grant positions might bring in additional and unanticipated revenues, we don't have that realized as part of our financial plan that we propose because we may be unaware of what those potential revenues could be.
Yes, just to confirm, the revenue change that you're highlighting, Mr. Suvarna, those relate to actual changes in state grant funding that we're aware of at this time. These are projections, but they're projections based on sort of actual events. Our hope certainly is to increase, as we were saying, through our efforts to increase our securing of grants, pursuing grants, but also some of this is to manage the grants that we have and also to provide additional support to our schools in their fiscal work as well. So it's multiple layers of grant management.
And that is, of course, until our very moving target moves, which could be as soon as this week with a state budget proposal from the governor. These numbers could shift. And that is the fun in the budget season, is that everything is really subject to change.
Got it. Okay, so just to kind of confirm, so the number that we see here in the projected revenue is what we kind of basically more or less know right now in terms of what we're seeing in terms of the grants, and then the number that we have there that we expect to pay for itself is unknown as of yet.
Correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Zimmerman.
Great. So from a classroom perspective, seeing this special educator staffing increase is really exciting. It would be a huge relief to our schools. But we as a community, as a nation, we hear all the time about, our educator shortage, our special educator shortage. Do you believe that we will be able to fill all of these allocated positions? And if so, give us a little bit more about how.
Yeah, that certainly is the aim. And I would say that the sooner that we have relative certainty on what we are expecting to have, the better that opportunity becomes. I will say that with how we compensate our staff, we do recruit. And this is not great for public education. This is not great for the region or even the state of Maryland, but it is good for us. That we do receive a lot of our employees from other districts because we are an attractive place to work. We are a great school system, and we are a preferred place to be. So we certainly have high hopes and expectations. What I don't want to do is I don't want us to ever be in the position to where we find somebody and we're not meeting a need, but we can't hire them because we don't have the position allocation available. And that is really, in many ways, we have found ourselves in that position even this year. Where we do have a need, that need has been articulated, but because of a budget limitation, we have not been able to secure personnel in the right places at the right times because we haven't had the position allocation available. We do need to do a better job of forecasting our needs and getting our staffing a little bit more consistent. What I really would hope that we could accomplish this year is get up to that level set so that any future changes that we make to class ratios seem a little less dramatic and don't look like we're actively recruiting massive classes of employee groups at one particular time, that we really find ourselves up to level, and then we can build from there.
I've speaking of that, kind of, forecasting a little bit. So currently there are 0 CKLA materials that are in other languages, whether that's classroom materials or the sent home at home materials, unless they're like MCPS or educator created. Is part of the budget like us making that ask of CKLA to, of Amplify to produce those materials? Or is part of that like, if we're asking our educators or part of our staff to do that, right, there's a cost to that. Is that included, or could we find out what that cost might be?
I'd love to get back to you on that.
Great.
I do know that what we have programmed in is making sure that all of the educators have the print materials.
Right.
That's the biggest component of this. As to whether or not they're in other languages or their student materials in other languages, I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay. Relatedly, when we allocate for these materials, oftentimes we don't forecast well for new students that we get. I can speak from my own perspective. I've definitely been in the position of running around the school saying, does anyone have a Unit 3 book? And thirdly, and asking friends at other schools. It's just one more thing to do, right? So if we're able to forecast that well, I think that would be really beneficial for our classrooms too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Silvestri.
Wanted to go back to the big ticket items, the benefits, the financial correction, health benefits plan, and the salary lapse. Well, so just for the viewing public, we can't assume that everyone's been keeping up with Budget Palooza. So how would you explain to the viewing public how we got into the health benefits, the need for a correction? Again, really high level so that anyone can understand.
We'll start with health benefits for sure. We are self-insured, meaning that we cover the cost of doing business, so to speak, for how we administer our health insurance plan. That is not uncommon for large organizations to be self-insured. And as a result, we are the financial responsible party for covering the cost of the benefit that we offer to our employees. The way that our employee benefit for healthcare is established is that it has some benefits that have some cost that are associated with them that are higher in terms of their utilization than what we have budgeted for. So, for example, if we think that 10% of our employees are going to utilize a medication that costs $100, and really 20% of our employees utilize this medication that costs $100, our costs are out of whack. So there's a couple of ways that we can respond to that. We can adjust how we have the plan structured, which we'll likely need to do that. And we can also adjust what we invest as the employers into that plan so that we can keep the costs low for employees. This represents really a combination of those two things. The need for us to have a plan that can sustain itself over time and doesn't exceed the costs of doing business, and then also backfilling the areas that we did not plan for and budget correctly. So a lot of this is financial forecasting. A lot of this is also trying to anticipate medical costs relative to the experience that our employees have in terms of how much utilization they have, and how we find that right intersection of providing great health benefits to our employees at a cost that we can afford and that they can afford.
So our projections have been off for
Correct.
the last several years, and we find ourselves in a
And we haven't adjusted the plan or our cost structure to accommodate for those changes. So if anything, we're trying to play catch up when we should be a little bit more proactive.
And the total investment in health benefits is, I understand, $400 million.
Yes.
This is just what we're
Yes.
budgeting for this year. So this example and the example you give about utilities reminded me, this is just the money we're adding this
Correct.
year. There
Yeah.
is the budget, and this is what we need more to keep maintaining a high-quality school district. So where can the public find, where is that $400 million for health benefits? Where is that millions of dollars that we spend in utilities that we now have a $4 million increase this year?
So we actually can share a couple of those things. I know in particular with utilities, if I'm not mistaken, it's on our macro sheet that we just released, and we have an exhibit that details some of those costs and outlines some of that component. But I may also call on, Carly, you want to come up and point out in our budget documents where we could find that?
I had forgotten how big that dollar, $400 million. It's an eighth of our budget.
40 million.
No. What we actually pay for health
not
insurance
the increase.
is
Okay.
$400 million, 1/8 of our budget. We're adding 40 million this year, but that is a huge number. So it just reminded me, there are huge numbers in this large budget. Again, just to help people understand. People say, you have $3 billion, that's enough money, you should be able to, why are you asking for more? No, these things, I just want the public to understand the real costs of running a high-quality school district of this size today.
And it's reflective of the carrying costs for 25,000 full-time employees. And so it is a component that after the Affordable Care Act, it's not really a choice for us to offer health benefits as a mechanism for recruitment and retention. We have a benefits package that we would like to think is very competitive and attracts employees as well. So it feeds into that recruitment and retention component as well.
So I apologize. Ms. Thompson is going to see if we can pull up some of those numbers right now. Those are numbers that typically are published in our budget book every year. In terms of that, we have a table of all of the benefit contributions, both base and increase. I do regret that has not yet been printed. However, as you know, many of our materials, in fact, the rest of the materials will be available by the end of the month, and so it will be available, and we will continue to update that.
If we can circle back so that the public can know where to find that information. Thank you.
Ideally, if you can have that before our next budget workshop, work session, that would be great.
I'll wait for the next round.
Sure. Ms. Rivera-Ovens?
Thank you for that. Thank you for explaining salary lapse. I think that was very beneficial. No, not previously. Previously, before your comments, I think that was very beneficial to why, because we had filled our positions, now we don't have a cushion necessarily. I wanted to just make sure that to thank you for making maintenance one of the focuses of this budget, because I think in any community meeting that we go to, any PTAs, some of the schools that even our kids go to, maintenance has always been an issue. So that would be item 44 in your budget, right? Which is combined, right? Which is combined both pay-as-you-go and the facility task for teams. I'm trying to understand the facility task for teams. So you're going to be adding 22 positions to that, Dr. Taylor?
That is correct.
Okay. And then they're going to be working as a cohort group of, HVAC,
Yeah, so if you,
Electricians?
this is a great question and pretty exciting because this is an idea that we've borrowed from other districts that have tried something similar. Imagine a team that is looking at the unfulfilled work orders that are in our school system, which we have many. The reason that they're unfulfilled is not because we have an ineffective or a lazy workforce, but because there's some capacity limitations in terms of getting to everything. And there's also that expertise isn't always in the building. Some of our very hardworking building service staff may not be experts in HVAC or may not be experts in plumbing or may not be experts in electrical. That we have a team that is multidisciplinary, meaning that they do have that expertise in those areas, and they plan on how they would go about clearing work orders and go school by school to clear work orders and to bring a school back up to our expected levels of performance.
Thank you again. I think that's, because one of the things we hear about is these work orders go into this abyss of we don't know where. It's kind of like the Bermuda Triangle of Montgomery County Public Schools. And some of them are a year, 2 years, and they keep putting in for the same work order. So this is going to alleviate that. And then you're adding 3 positions for building services staffing, which when I heard you give us a description of it, it's something that we have not increased in 20 years. So it's literally, we're adding new schools, we're adding, but yet we have not added adequate staffing to be able to replenish that. So we've been doing more with less, in a sense.
That's a very accurate description, and sadly, not only have we not added in that space, but in often lean times, it's also been an area that we've turned to find some efficiency. This is an incredibly hardworking group of folks. They are the people that get deployed on snow days to clear parking lots and to clear walkways. And our most recent snow event is a great example of how stretched thin we really are in terms of making sure that we can have adequate resources out there and we get to every school campus. And it is not the responsibility of 1 or 2 people per campus, but it really just needs to be a team approach. And how can we leverage some centralized expertise, everything from keying buildings to paint to electrical and carpentry. All of those things need to happen in our over 200 campuses.
On the school-based staffing and support, if we can go to that page, the special ed staffing is long overdue, as you know, and as we can see by the amount of teachers that you're projecting that we need to just be at the adequate class ratio, I think is what you said. Not even to add, but just to be at a place where we can actually just do the basic work for. And I echo Ms. Zimmerman's, point that this is great news. So just to be clear, with the 500 total paraeducators, 366 that we currently have as part-time in special ed will be offered to, kind of like our pre-K, right? Will be offered to be full-time. Right, which leave us to recruit about 144 additional special paraeducators. And with that, finally, after many years of advocacy, we're going to see that there's going to be a differential pay with those paraeducators.
Yeah, those are great observations. And it seems like a monster number when you're looking at, oh my gosh, how are they going to find 680 positions? We hire well over 1,000 people a year, every year, for a variety of roles. But it is noteworthy to point out that there are incumbents in 366 of those positions. And actually, that 46.6 million would be more if they were brand new positions. We are already leveraging the part-time pay that we've already committed to those positions as part of that budget equation. So the net is reduced a little bit. It would be a substantially higher dollar figure, This really is a way for us to reduce some of the churn in that space. Finding 134 new para positions and 188 new teacher positions, to Ms. Zimmerman's point, although that is challenging, we actually think that we'll do quite well. And it's not outside the bounds of our recruitment abilities based on what we have to do every year. Think about it this way, it's less than a position per school in terms of teaching positions, and definitely in terms of para positions, it's less than one per elementary school in terms of the volume that we have.
It's long overdue, and I think this is going to make us more competitive as well as a system, because we keep losing incredible part-time paraeducators to other systems that do have the full-time option for them. And many of them are bilingual or trilingual, so this is really, I think, a game changer. So thank you to you and the staff. And the EML staffing, just to be clear, even though we're adding 47 new teachers, the ratio of classroom size right now is like 1 to 41, I think, right?
This is not an improvement. This is just to make level. You're absolutely right.
So even though we're seeing some of these and we're saying, oh, they're adding new teachers, they're adding new staff, this is just really adding to the point where it's adequate support in the classroom.
So I had an interesting conversation with a couple parents recently who said, oh my gosh, you're adding teachers, but you're declining in enrollment. How on earth is that happening? And I said, you know, that would be a challenge for sure for me to understand if I didn't understand how our student population is changing too. Because what we've noticed over the last several years is that our students with disabilities population has increased. Our emergent multilingual student population has increased. And even though our student population has been relatively flat or has even declined in some areas, it does not account for the fact that we have students with diverse learning needs that need to be accounted for, and we account for that in a slightly different way than just general ed staffing.
The other question that I have in this scenario here is, when you were on the road and some of the community meetings I went to listen to the parents in different parts of the county, there were many parents who brought the issue of support services for special education or for children who had an IEP or 504 plan with speech therapy and others that seems that we're having a really hard time being able to comply. And even in those schools where we know we have children with severe disabilities, we're having a hard time complying. What is the scenario in this picture to be able to support those positions?
Yeah, they're included for sure in that 188 educator positions. But in addition, beyond that, there are some clever things that we can do. Had a great conversation with the board president actually this morning about this exact topic, and this is something that resurfaces in our community time and time again. When we don't have a speech pathologist or someone to provide speech services, it does not absolve us of the responsibility to still provide it. So what we have typically had to do is contract that service with a third-party provider that is more expensive than us providing that with staffing. So we need to come up with an approach that honors the role of our speech pathologists, that allows them to focus on that work without ancillary responsibilities, with really trying to find ways to make that an attractive position. It is a national shortage. Every time that I have appeared before county council, I have begged Sidney Katz for his wife to come out of retirement because she was a speech pathologist, because we could use all the speech pathologists that we can get. I think at some point I will wear her down and we'll get one more. I'm hopeful at least, but the reality is that this is a high needs area. It's going to continue to be a high needs area. So we really need to approach this from two different lenses. How do we keep the speech pathologists that are already in our system and support them so that they want to stay with us? And two, how do we recruit and create the conditions for that to be a position within MCPS that's fulfilled?
Ms. Wolf.
Thank you. This budget is very clear as far as it goes. My question is, our budgets sort of reflect our values and what's important to us. And when I look at this budget, I'm reminded that we continue to have data that is predictable by race. I see the struggling categories in this budget, but what I don't see is intentional activities that are going to address the gaps that we are seeing with African American students. And that's going to be a question I'm going to ask in every section we cover because I don't see that. And I would like to know what is intentional in this budget that's going to address that issue.
Well, I'm glad you asked. And I will expound on this again when we meet again to talk about discretionary expenditures. And that's not something that we call out specifically, though we call out a great many things with great specificity. I will say that one of the things that should trouble us and something that troubles me is the disproportionate identification of students with disabilities for our Black students. The disproportionate identification of students with disabilities for Hispanic students. And making sure that we are not only providing great services to students with disabilities, but that we're also making sure that our identification of students is appropriate and that we're providing adequate supports. In our non-discretionary requirements, beyond providing instructional materials and providing some of the things that we've enumerated and making sure that there are enhanced opportunities for materials and supplies, this budget does not do a whole lot to advance MCPS or to innovate MCPS, but what it does do is it helps to stabilize what we say that we should be doing. And so this is a budget that is very much trying to put the train back on the tracks and to give us some stability so that we can create the conditions for innovation and improvement. I absolutely hear you that we should call out specific things that trouble us. I am delighted that we are addressing exactly your concern in a couple of different ways, even though it may not be spelled out in words.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, and clearly disproportionality is a result of overrepresentation in special education. But we have a number of African American students in general education, and the gap is still there. That's what I'm trying to understand. I know those in the free and reduced lunch price category, those in special ed, but I'm not seeing intention in the budget for those general education students, and the gap is still persistent.
So a couple of things in today's topic, and I'll give a little bit of a preview on what to expect in your next budget work session too. One of the gaps that we aim to fill is to make sure that schools have adequate materials and supplies. It's not something that we've been particularly attentive to. We haven't done a great job with that, and it is definitely an issue. Making sure that we have educators in the classroom and that we don't lose them, that is actually a critical strategy for us to be successful. If we have high educator churn, it is going to have a negative impact on general education. If we don't have adequate materials and supplies, it's going to have a negative impact on what happens in the classroom for general education as well. This is a lot, as best as I can describe it, is to create the conditions for those to be less of a variable moving forward. I think that we need to invest in a couple of areas that we haven't invested in the past. In particular, and this is the preview to the next budget work session, into how we create a level playing field for school resources and what the principal has available to them. One school with an overactive PTA that provides a lot of additional support shouldn't be a concern of somebody who has a school that doesn't have those financial resources without us creating a mechanism to level that playing field. We do that in this budget. We have been very successful in a number of situations, providing some industry certifications and some GED support for students at night through our CREA program, but we feel like that shouldn't be limited to one group of students, our EML students. We feel like we can expand that to a lot of students who need that additional support, and we see an opportunity for that as well. So can't wait to talk about that in addition. And that absolutely, in both of those scenarios, encompasses Black students and other students who have not found success in the general education environment.
You know, I'm not trying to take away from any other category. Don't misunderstand me. And I do believe that special education requires special attention at this time. But I also think that paraeducators are needed in the general education setting, and that would go a long ways towards helping improve the opportunity gap.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf. Ms. Montoya.
Thank you. I have so many questions, so I will likely have to follow up afterwards. But I want to kind of piggyback on what Ms. Wolf said about our Latino students, because oftentimes it seems they get put into just, we think all Latino students are EML, right? Emerging multilingual learners. And that is just not true. And not all of our emerging multilingual learners are Latino, right? So I, like Ms. Wolf, don't see, I think what she phrased as intentional activity, which I like, geared towards our students who are in general education. We see that even when you control for socioeconomic status and various other variables, that our Latino students are not meeting proficiency scores. Sometimes those proficiency scores are in the single-digit numbers. And especially for our younger learners, I'm extremely concerned because that piles on as they get older. And so I hear what you're saying about maintaining staff and the supplies increases, which I think are great. And CREA doesn't really affect our youngest learners. But is there anywhere in here where we're looking at high intensity tutoring, or, you know, we see these models in DC. I think Baltimore just got a bunch of grants that seems very similar to the DC model. The data shows that it works. I know we're scraping for pennies here, but am I missing something? Is that here somewhere and I don't see it, or is that something that we have to put on the wish list?
It's not reflected in this budget. That is not identified, and candidly, I think you and Mrs. Wolf are really approaching this from the right lens, which is, I'm a parent at home. How do I see in this budget the impact to my child's experience? And you're going to see an impact in a number of different ways. And it may not necessarily be like, this is what we're doing for Black students, or this is what we're doing for Latino students, or this is what we're doing for Asian students. But what I hope you can see is a noticeable and intentional investment in making sure that learning environments are improved, that expectations are clear and followed up on, which is actually not a budget item, but critical to our path moving forward, that there is not random shortages of materials and supplies because of a budget line that reflects one way, but our actual needs reflecting something else, and that there is a qualified educator in front of the classroom that doesn't change every year. So for us, those are the critical pieces that we see as part of the strategy to maintain that continuity. I would say that our general education investment is not as reflective of the changes in the budget as much as it is how we shore up the things that are already existing in the budget. But no, tutoring is not something that we've added in. We did have the blessing through ESSER funds post-pandemic and towards the end of the pandemic that augmented a lot of additional support that we just don't have. And so unless we build it, the base budget, it's not going to be in there.
Okay, because it seems like some schools might have various programs or community partnerships, and I can appreciate that perhaps those schools are Title I schools or community schools or focus schools, right? There's various levels of support that come with that. But we also know that across the board, a lot of our schools have increasing farms rates. And, you know, we talked about special education. And so I'm just, you know, those students need assistance also. And a lot of times they get overlooked, which then can perpetuate this falling behind.
One of our hopes, and this is really more of a topic for next time, but it's great to preview it, is to relook at the principal's allocation for each individual school and how we differentiate that to provide additional support. Could a principal use some of those resources to augment with some tutoring? Absolutely. Do they have the discretion to use that for additional other support services? Absolutely. I think that that's our intention, is to update where they are in terms of their financial standing. It's arguably some of the best money spent in the budget is what we provide to the schools for their use, as long as we paint the guidelines for them and give them some structure and some support on how they might utilize that for the best return on investment.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And my second question for this round relates to Exhibit 22, which is the Division of Transportation. I see here that there's a line for electric buses at $1.285 million, and it says funds are added for rate increases on the leases for 236 electric buses currently in the fleet, plus the lease of additional electric buses in fiscal year 2026. And then I also see a service vehicle repairs $482,000. So my question is whether the service vehicle repairs are buses or other MCPS vehicles. And then with the electric buses, is this a new increase from the prior? Can you just explain a little bit so we all understand what's going on there?
I'll let somebody else opine on the service vehicles. I don't know the answer to that, but most of our contracts, especially the ones that are multi-year contracts, do have some inflationary value that's baked into multi-year commitments, and this is certainly reflective of that. But if there's anything else anyone else wants to add.
So we anticipated based on the contract that we had that in this year, the rate would then increase.
Absolutely.
And the, pardon my language for anyone who may feel offended, the prior bad performance does not change any of this.
Correct.
Ms. Stewart.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted
do
to
you
add
have something to add?
That second line is for our non-bus fleet.
Okay, thank you.
We will have a second round though, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my first question is has to do with special education, and I notice on, I think it was item 9, where you listed the extra support for special education, but in the second part of this item, there's the special schools listed, and there's a projected less enrollment at our special schools. Just based on what I hear from the public, I have a hard time understanding with the incredible need that we have, that we are projecting less enrollment in our 4 special schools listed here. Could I get some explanation on that?
So Ms. Pugh is coming up to the table to speak more specifically to that. But again, as what you're seeing here is just changes in the projected enrollment as we go through those projections.
And it's not uncommon for us to have a cohort of kids that matriculate in and out and trying to adjust for that. That's not to say that there aren't projected identifications and new students that get enrolled, that routinely happens. But what this, I think, in general, and I could be mistaken here, is also trying to reflect a net number. So you may also have a cohort of students that is leaving that school or matriculating to another school as a consequence of that. It's not irregular. That's pretty normal.
And that's 100% accurate. It's based on the known students that we have that are identified that would be either leaving that school or coming into that school just on a regular basis. Throughout the school year, students are moving in and out of those schools routinely, and unidentified students come in, get identified, and then maybe move to that as well. It's a pretty complicated formula that I wish Julie Hall were here to explain to you, but that's basically what it is that it's an ongoing enrollment, and what you're seeing here is projected based on the known.
So the question that brings up is, are we identifying properly? So, and I don't know if that's even a staff issue that's related, that's in this budget. Like staff to identify.
It's not really a budget question, although I will say that there's always room for improvement, and it certainly is a challenge that I think that we're looking at. I think thinking more globally and thinking bigger picture about special education, that we really need to take a step back and look at special education in general from the 30,000-foot view about what can be improved overall. And really, how do we want to evolve our special education services to provide better services just in general? I don't dismiss or even reject the notion that there are individual circumstances that blow our minds and we're like, how on earth? And why did we end up where we ended up with a specific situation? But it is something that we have to look at. It is something that we need to take into consideration, but we also need to take into consideration the entire continuum of special education services, not just the identification piece. There's a lot of areas that need to be improved. And that's been pointed out to us on a pretty regular basis.
Thank you for that answer. So my second question was from Exhibit 21. The taxi services for the McKinney-Vento program of almost $1 million. Well, I'll let you explain what that program is for the public.
Our McKinney-Vento students are the students who are temporarily or permanently displaced from housing. And there are some federal rules and regulations that govern transportation, as well as some other support needs that we provide to some of our students that are homeless and need support. One of those things is making sure that we provide continuity of services. So if a student is temporarily or permanently displaced from their housing situation, to make sure that we can still provide services at the school that the child is familiar with, and that is considered their home school. And from their home school, that sometimes means that we have to transport long distances, and it's an irregular transportation pattern based on what they need, either in a short or a long-term situation. We do utilize taxi services for that, in addition to other transportation, to make sure that we get kids to and from school, and even though they may be many, many miles away from where their home school may be on that temporary basis. And as a result of that, this is one of those items that is a reflection of what we actually spend, not necessarily an increase per se, but a reflection of what the dollars that are typically committed in that area.
So that was the next part of my question. Are you projecting a particular number of increase or percentage increase?
Not a sharp increase, no,
okay.
but part of our responsibility in this budget, and what I hope it comes across, is that we have been married to budget lines that are not a true reflection of the need and are not a true reflection of the expenditure, and we are hoping to correct that in this budget by telling you that this is what we actually spend in this area. And there's a reason for it, and largely due to the fact that we do have an increase in farms rates. So we do have an increase in needs across the county, and that we need to start accounting for that in a really meaningful way.
Well, I have heard that there was a 70% increase in unhoused people in Montgomery County. So we are a reflection of the county, right? So if there are more people losing their homes, being evicted, unhoused, we will see that in our school system. So I think it is, we need to be ready for that eventuality, and also work hard with our county partners to keep kids in their homes. So then we wouldn't have this problem. And mobility is a huge factor in academic success, et cetera. So it's not exactly a budget question, but I just wanted to drill down on that a little bit to see if we were preparing for that. And I do see this line item, so that helps. Thanks.
And it's
Right.
not something that we can ignore either. We will have to address this by law and also by our morals and ethics to address this need.
Thank you.
In terms of drilling down on some data and numbers, I have some numbers I would like to have. One is about the special education staffing, about 688 positions and $46 million. Michael, is this $46 million salary and salary and benefit altogether, or just salary?
It's both salaries and benefits. It's total compensation.
Okay, so I do a little bit of math. Regardless position and level, that's about $67,000 per position. Now, my question is, Dr. Taylor mentioned that you have already counted for the TPT money that we budgeted before. So I would like to know what that number is. Number two, drilling down on exhibition number 10, exhibit 10, about substitute bus drivers and attendance. So I understand we have 1,300 bus routes, right? We go around the globe 4.5 times each day. But I would like to know, because it's a $1.5 million increase for substitute bus drivers, we need them, but tell me how many positions you're looking for in that category. Okay, and then in terms of the number 14, exhibit number 14, about contractual nurse services, about $2.5 million increase in that categories. Can we have any reimbursement in terms of itinerary nurse from the state through the Medicaid programs? So I wonder whether this number has taken into consideration of any reimbursement we might potentially have.
Some of those expenses would qualify for Medicaid reimbursement, not all of them. And we'll get you an answer as to whether or not that's reflective of that or not, but some do qualify for Medicaid reimbursement.
Okay. Continue to drill down on the numbers for the extended school year program. This is not a new program. We do the program, have been a number of years. I see a big jump in the number for this year. Is it because we have more Title I schools? But I thought we don't have more Title I schools, so help me.
This was previously grant supported and no longer grant supported. So our ESSER money has dried up, and this is part of that fiscal cliff.
You can hear my, okay, last drilling down on the numbers. I see that we are hiring more people to work on our buildings, and they are all good. Now, one question I always wonder is our musical instruments. We hear from students all the time. Actually, I think Wooten High School sent us a video clip of, some of those conditions of our musical instruments. As I understand now, right now we contracted out to be serviced and fixed. Have we ever done a financial forecast or projection to see, are we getting more by contracted out or creating some positions within our system, and which way will get us better return of the investment?
I hope I can do a good job of answering that question, because musical instrument replacement is definitely one of those things that tends to suffer from year to year, because the cost of repair and replacement tends to go up pretty significantly each year. That typically does require a lot of expertise and a workspace that we don't currently have. That being said, it's not to say that we couldn't do that comparison. It's probably worth taking a look at. The volume is significant, and the needs for orchestra versus the needs for brass and a band, There are some differences, that's definitely a fund that is worthy of additional investment and look at in the future in terms of just even supporting it in general, regardless of us even looking at the comparison of in-house versus contractual services, just because that is something that we have an asset. Those assets do take a beating going on the bus, going home, coming back. They really, the useful life of the instruments really is diminished. In particular, some of our bigger instruments take an even more significant beating. So making sure that that's properly invested in is sometimes a limitation.
You answered it, and I'll just add that we have multiple contracts with multiple instrument repair locations throughout the county to be able to accommodate what is needed. There are only so many piano tuning places that can accept and do the specialized work that's needed. So to your point, it's multiple instruments, multiple specialty areas that we're contracting with our local businesses to support in the model that we currently have.
I understand that, but I also know that the highest number of our instruments is probably viola, violin. You know, there are a number. You can say that these are the 90% of what we use, what we have in the system. So I just put it out there to see if you analyze the numbers and see if what is a better way to approach it. Now, board members.
So real quick, we have an update on a couple items.
Okay.
I can go through and give you some of the numbers in response to your questions and also Ms. Silvestri's questions.
Okay.
So you asked about the dollar amount for the TPT positions, the temporary part-time positions that we're converting in those paraeducators. There's $1.6 million of local funds that we were able to repurpose towards the positions and $1 million of grant funds. So that's $2.6 million total of the TPT dollars. We will have to get back to you on the bus driver subs. That's a little bit of a different calculation. We'll need to get back to you on that. In terms of the utilities funds, that increase that we were talking about of $6 million is on a base of $52 million. So our base utility bill in this current fiscal year is $52 million, and we anticipate that going up next year by that amount. In terms of the benefit costs, this is one where, again, we do have a detailed table that we will print before the board's action. But I can tell you that you are correct, Ms. Silvestre. Right now, our benefit contribution to the fund is just under $400 million, and so this $40 million increase would take it to about $435. In total, when you look at our employee benefits, our retirement benefits, our workers' comp, all of those, that sort of required set of employer-funded contributions comes to nearly $800 million.
And I guess my question was more about where can I find that information
I'm
myself?
sorry. Well,
Where
we will
can
be printing it.
Where can the public find that information so they can see what is in the budget, not just what we're adding this year?
And we will absolutely have that when we complete the exhibits by the end of the month.
Okay, thank you.
All right, time check, board member, we still have time. This is scheduled. So I'm going to go around for the second round. I'm going to start from Ms. Stewart's side.
Okay. So big picture, big ask. Thank you so much for this budget, but I would like to know how much it would cost to look at our class sizes for kindergarten. I'm thinking about this as a triage approach, but not just kindergarten, also our early grades, so kindergarten, first and second, broken down, so we have an idea. And again, part of what brought me to ask this question is from our last meeting. And we highlighted how the kindergarten class, their baseline, is significantly lower. Kindergarten classes, I hear a lot from the public, from teachers, that they're not manageable. And we're having these increased needs coming up. And so I just think I would be remiss in not at least asking, what would it take to deal with kindergarten in particular, and also first and second grade, for that information?
Yeah, absolutely, and we can absolutely highlight that as part of a future work session for you on the budget. I will say that something to look forward to is that it won't be a static number. So you are likely going to be a different cost to lower class size by 1 than a different cost to lower a class size from 1 to 2, just because of how the classes may split and how precise we will get by school to identify the impact if we were to change the ratio by school. So that's absolutely helpful. Another thing that I think sometimes might be helpful for the public to understand about class size is that when we adjust the class size, we're not just talking about personnel, that we are often also talking about some of the facility needs that come along with that, and what the classroom capacity is in some of our schools. We may have a very tight school, and we may think it's a great idea to add an extra classroom, and we may do just that, but there may not be a classroom in that building physically for that teacher to operate out of, so then we have to make some other facility decisions as a consequence of that, and we'll reflect that as well.
Speaking of facilities, these teams, very excited about that. And I know we talked about how these maintenance orders just drag on. And at some point, there was going to be a public-facing system to track that. Is that somehow reflected in this budget?
Yes, it is. And to do that does cost some money, and we are reflecting that as part of this proposal as well.
Okay, because I did see that line item. I wasn't quite sure if that was the public-facing part. So, and my last, this is big, so I apologize. It's just something I want us to look at. And I tried to see where they were quickly in the budget, but we haven't had actually the full thing for that long. So we have our from COVID money, we had social workers added, and we absorbed that into the budget because we really do need those social workers. Okay, I get that. But we also have, nurses that are under the county HHS. And so this, I know there's a dollar amount associated with those social workers. This adds to our maintenance of effort. So this adds to our overall budget, which I don't know if people understand what maintenance of effort is, but you can't reduce per pupil spending from year to year. So as far as I know, this adds to that. And plus, we are trying to do what we do best, right? And again, we need this service. But have we talked to the county about balancing who has the budget and the management of certain services that we provide? And this was added to our portfolio.
Yeah, I think that's an ongoing conversation. I think one of the struggle points too is, the need is always going to be there. And whether it's county services that picks up the need or whether it's the school services that picks up the need, it is something that we need to map out as to what agency is the best at providing a certain service. As somebody who became an educator in the late 90s, I can tell you that education in general has changed quite a bit, much of which for the better because we are more attentive to the needs of the whole child. But what we've given up in that exchange has been maybe a focus on what happens in the classroom as a consequence. So we are in many ways far away from what our core business function is, or our core function as an organization is, when we adapt some of these other ancillary services, even though we know that it helps and supports our kids. But it is something that we will need to figure out. It's not an overnight switch either, like you take these positions, we take these positions, you do this, we do that. But something that does need to be sorted out and needs to be a part of our dialogue together with our county decision makers as well.
Well, I'll look forward to hearing about that dialogue. I'm thinking strategically as well. So, well, thank you so much for answering my questions.
Ms. Montoya?
Hi, thank you. I want to ask a question about utilities and specifically electric. My understanding is that we all should anticipate our electricity bills going up because of some ongoing things at a much higher level that has nothing to do with schools. And I don't have a complete understanding of all of that, so I don't know if it's just residential or residential and commercial. I want to know if the increase amount that we see, is that because we anticipate our rate going up in that regard, just so that the public is clear about, or are we just leaving the lights on before we leave?
No, it's a planned, making the assumption on our current utilization, what the planned rate increase is.
Thank you. And then as it regards to the Chromebook repair, I saw the table that you included, which is really great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So you can see this really large increase from year to year of the past 3 years. Is this what we would call normal wear and tear, or maybe some of it, or are there other challenges to having these Chromebooks for our students?
This is a relatively new phenomenon in MCPS, having personal computing devices that are assigned to students, assigned to classrooms, and assigned to schools in the volume that we've been doing. And since the pandemic, it is a little bit of a learning curve, but this is not irregular from normal wear and tear. Okay. If anything, some of the normal wear and tear seems to have leveled off more or less in terms of the volume of things that happen. But it is something that you have to plan for. It's a huge expense. The things that become a little irritating are the same things that regular consumers find irritating, that the cost of one thing one day is different than the cost of one thing tomorrow, and keeping pace with some of those inflationary impacts that really are very, very difficult to manage sometimes and to forecast for.
And as a related question, and perhaps it actually can apply to the instruments as well that Ms. Yang was asking about, because especially I know at the elementary school level, there are a lot of instruments and a lot of broken instruments. And sometimes they happen even right before the big performances, and we're scrambling to try to figure out how this child can still perform because they've worked so hard. And I'm wondering, I know we have many contracts with various vendors across the county for all of these things, but is there a way to partner? For example, I remembered that some MCPS students were learning how to repair laptops and getting a certification. Is there a possibility to collaborate more with our community partners, or maybe have some sort of in-house training where they can receive SSL hours? It also gives them a great marketable skill to have their own private services to offer that. And just whether or not we look into these types of things, notwithstanding all of the things that all of you have to look into.
I think it's a great aspirational goal. It's not something that I've accounted for in this budget or in the last few months, but I think that's 100% a good thing for us to lean into over time, for sure. I think it would help a lot. And even if it didn't improve our financial standing, what a great experience opportunity for our students, and a great learning experience for them.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Rivera-Ovens?
Thank you for that. On the grant writer positions, I forgot to mention these because to me these are very key positions. So you are budgeting for 2 positions. Just wanted to hear the vision of what do you think these folks are going to be going after? What kind of grants?
So currently, this would be a 200% increase to our grants office of 1 person, which we know that there are things that we pass up on because we don't have the capacity to apply and then later to manage some of the grant applications. There are very large federal grants that we could be applying for that are competitive, that we have passed on, because oftentimes those very large federal grants are 100, 200, 300 pages just in the grant application, and then there's the management on top of that. Those are definitely lucrative opportunities that we forego. There are also smaller community grants that are less of a maintenance burden in terms of a management expense that we also feel like we could pursue. But again, the volume is prohibitive to us, and we really have to be selective about what we go after and how. This may also necessitate us to revisit this and maybe even expand in future years to having a broader grants footprint. There are finite dollars in the philanthropic space, but one of the things that this community clearly values is that when we work with other community agencies in concert and we're able to do things together, it's a very powerful thing when we can work with some of our nonprofit community to apply for some of these grants in concert, but they also have limited capacity. Mm-hmm. So there's really some win-win opportunities that we envision, but my immediate need or my immediate proposal is really about not giving up great opportunities that we see that we really could be very competitive for just because we don't have the capacity. Yeah. And right now we just don't have the capacity with one person in a district our size to manage grants and to apply for grants is just, it's just a huge limitation for us.
And thank you for doing that, Dr. Taylor. Has always puzzled me, even before I joined the Board of Education, why in such a large district like ours, because I know for a fact we also leave a lot of money of unused grant funding because we have the lack of management. And these are dollar amount that can have a significant impact on the education and our system. So I think that is great. Some of the issues that we're talking about, I think could be focused to the tutoring issue. You know, we don't have any more ESSER funding, but we do have local foundations that are very focused on equity and education. And we're very fortunate to live in this area where they are foundations that do want to make a difference and want to support inequities in our system. So my hope is that we also kind of go after some of those fundings to bring some of those areas that we know that worked during COVID, one of them being tutoring for our children, even the fixing of the instruments for our kids, having maybe a grant funding that be able to do that. They are things that I think we can do a lot with, but having one person do it all is just, it was just such a lack of vision. And anyway, we'll leave it at that. But one of the things that Ms. Wolf touched on was that we need to be intentional activity about is that looking at the special ed increase of budget, one of the things that has concerned me for the last few years is the increase of EML special education. And that has been a significant increase across the board. And I hope that with this budget, we can actually intentionally look at why we're having that huge disparity in that area. And one of the things I'm a little bit confused about was the nurses, what Ms. Yan brought up with the 2.5 million. 2.5 million. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is this? I thought the nurses were county employees, and that was something that was in the budget of HHS. So I'm trying to understand what is the cost to us?
Yeah, so we actually have a population of nurses that serve our students with disabilities with some really unique needs. And so a lot of this, I think, is reflective of that, if I'm not mistaken. So,
okay, so we're talking not the school nurses, but we're talking about the special nurses in special education.
That's right.
That some children need to have them 24 hours, so they need to have them with them in order for them to be able to attend school. So we're talking about two different things.
Yeah, and we're serving, thank you so much for that question. And yes, we're serving some students with some really significant and severe disabilities that require feeding tubes and even some surgical equipment that travels with the student. in our educational setting, and this is in our comprehensive schools as well as some of our special schools, and so that's a need that actually continues to grow.
So that is a cost that we cannot, in other words, it is what it
Yes.
is, and we need to serve the students by law. We have to provide those services. I just want to say that on that point, nurses is another area where there is a huge deficit of. And so even the county has a hard time providing the nurses that we have our schools, and they're contractual. And so on. So this is an area that definitely is an area that it would be great if we can grow our own and support what we already do in the high schools with our early nursing, nurses program that we have in different schools, and be able maybe to have a path of scholarships for those students that they can actually come back to MCPS and serve, this huge need. I would love to see that. And just to reiterate the $800 million benefits, right? And this is to cover not just our current employees, but also all those folks who have worked so hard in our system. So this is to include our retirees as well. And is that number also going to include the transition of the 366 paraeducators who are now going to get full benefits? Does that number reflect that? Are we thinking?
It does in the budgeted amount. It is reflective of that. That's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Sueshi.
Back to the big compensation number. Could you restate the increase that we are proposing for this year, percentage-wise, and what it was last year?
Might have to have someone look up the last year percentage. I was not with you at that time. This year's percentage is right around 5% total, a little over 5% total. 3.25% increase is effectively the inflationary offset, cost of living offset, and then the step for a year's worth of experience merit credit. So those two together are just a little over 5% increase, and it varies depending on the employee group and where someone is on a specific step scale. Some percentages are higher than others, but the ballpark is right a little bit above 5%, if I'm not mistaken. We're giving you the answer from last year.
Last year, there were a few different things going on. So there were some increases to the salary scale for SEIU, for example, of 3%. There were salary scale increases for MCEA as well.
So if this time around it's around 5%, was it more than 5% or less than 5%?
And I'm sorry, the structure was so different last year that I'm having trouble sorting that out in my head at this moment.
Yeah.
But
That's okay. The number
it was
looks
structured
bigger.
very differently last year.
The 192 million looks bigger than what I remember the placeholder was last year.
Yes.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around in terms of the increase in relation to last year.
Hi, Carly Thompson, Acting Budget Director. So last year we had a mix of flat amount increases and percentages. And then if you'll recall, in terms of a general wage adjustment, the GWA for our McCat-McBoa union, they did not have a GWA for FY 2025. But there were step increases for that union. For MCEA, it was a flat rate increase for GWA. For our 10-month employees, that was $2,918 plus a step. And then for our SEIU union, it was a 3% GWA increase in a step.
Can you repeat the teachers?
Sure. So the 10-month employees, it was $2,918 for the GWA. And for our 12-month employees, that was about $3,428. And then the step increase.
I need you to follow up and just tell me, is it a bigger number this year than last year?
Sure.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Taylor, going back to class size, because this is a popular item in the community. Could you give us your vision for how you would like to handle class size in the future? I know it's not in this budget for this year, upcoming year, but what do you see happening in the next year or so that we can address class size in the future?
Thank you. I think to really do a good job of addressing class size, we need to do a couple of things from a system standpoint first. The first thing that we need to do is to make the shift from having staffing guidelines to having staffing standards. And here's what I mean by that, because they are two radically different ideas. The current structure that we have right now as guidelines are flexible. There is no expectation when a guideline is stretched that there is fulfillment of that guideline after the start of the school year. So if class size magically balloons at a school, there is no mechanism within the school district right now to respond to that other than us and our attentiveness to a specific issue and the amount of funds that we have that we could apply to that issue. Having standards and funding those standards sets hard and fast rules in terms of what we would expect from classroom to classroom to classroom based on whatever environmental conditions that we would want to put in place. And that really does need to be what we would expect. What we have right now is a great amount of variability from one campus to the next across the county, and there is not a whole lot of continuity in terms of what a parent could expect in one corner of the county versus what they could expect in another corner of the county in terms of what class size can be. There's also not great continuity between what a parent can expect from one grade level to the next based on whatever discretionary staffing that the building principal has in place at the time. And I'll give you an example. A building principal may have 9 teachers allocated to 2 different grades, and they put 4 in one grade and 5 in another. Class sizes will be inherently smaller in the grade that they have 5 and inherently larger in the class size in the grade that they have 4. We can probably do a better job of setting what those expectations look like. That being said, that work should take place when it's not in the middle of a budget season, should be very deliberate, should involve our community partners and parents in that discussion as to what should a class size be at specific grade levels in MCPS. And it will likely require us to take an iterative approach where we tackle segments of our class size each year, where theoretically we would attack early elementary grades, then late elementary grades, or high school and then middle school, to really look at how we staff our schools and what our expectations are, and to make that the expectation for the county. We don't do that right now. And what one of the major criticisms that we experience, and rightfully so, is that the experience at one school is dramatically different than the experience at another school, and this is one of the things that would provide a little bit more of that continuity.
Thank you.
Mrs. Zimmerman.
Awesome. I also have kind of a compensation-related question. When we are talking about our position reclassification and looking at Exhibit 6, I know that all of this is, right, our proposed budget, but I'm curious, where have we gotten these numbers from? Have we worked with our partners to get them? Just a little bit more background about Exhibit 6 in particular.
Yeah, we did a full reclassification process. And so with that, we take actual numbers of the employees that we have, and we take their actual salary and benefits figures and differentiate them that way. So it is a reflection of what we actually have in terms of positions and who does what.
Okay. So this is like the financial impact part, and seeing increases in salaries. This is something that our partners find agreeable, that they're interested in.
in this case, for at least for the paraeducator reclassification, this is something that SEIU has advocated for, that we do a reclassification study. SEIU or any of our association partners don't have influence over dollar figures or amounts or anything along those lines when it comes to a reclassification, other than a request to initiate that process, and we've done that. Similarly, with the athletic specialist, athletic director position, whatever you want to call it, it's still the same position for whatever that's worth. Making the transition of a supervisory position from MCEA to the MCAP scales, there's a translation cost, a switching cost, and reclassifying that position, given its level of responsibility, there's a cost to that, and that's the real dollar figure cost.
Okay. It's not specifically in the chart. So then how many, like, I get that you can't rattle off, like, for each position, like how many positions we're moving that way. But maybe for the athletic director position, do we know how many are moving in that
That's
way?
easy. That's 26.
Okay.
Or 25, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. But for paraprofessionals, we can get you that number.
Okay, great. My other question, in the Chromebook repair section, for the public, can you explain why it's mainly concentrated in elementary and not across K through 12?
I defer to you on that. I don't know.
Sure. I think it's just a technical aspect of not being able to break that down by level and then splitting the budget between elementary, middle, and high. We can take a look at that, but it's reflective of the costs that we incur for schools as it relates to Chromebook repair. But I can take that back and look into a potential breakdown between level.
Yeah, because right now it just shows a huge chunk in elementary.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so then there are other expenses in middle and high school that.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's an expense
I
that is spread, so we can look into that.
Okay, great. And then my last question, in Exhibit 32, when we're talking about translation services, I'm wondering, have we considered in this as well, like, translation services that staff already provide, and that some of that is stipended? Are we looking to increase that? Because that could, in a little bit, maybe if we're increasing that stipend or increasing the number of people that can qualify for that stipend, that we might see a lower cost overall in those translation services.
And so there are a number of factors here, and absolutely, this is one where, again, we're adding the funds to reflect what we actually spend here. So this is just, but to your point about how to address this more broadly, this is an area where we want to look globally and take a different approach at looking at it, because we do know that the needs are increasing, and we want to be sure we can meet all of those needs. To your point about the stipended, working with staff, that's an area that we want to continue to expand. The amount is negotiated, and we're happy to continue to have those conversations, but we will continue to look at how we can expand that aspect of our program.
Okay, because if I'm not mistaken, it's that it doesn't look like the stipend amount is included in this chart. Maybe it's included somewhere else, and I'm sorry, I haven't read all the charts yet.
No, that's okay. This piece does, again, reflect our actual costs and truing up our budget. So this is an area where the budget line, as we've been saying, this is an area where the budget line has been at a lower number than our actual spending every year. So it's encompassing a large number of increased costs that we're, again, accounting for.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to ask the last question. It's just a request, and then I want to remind everyone that we still have 2 more work sessions. So, Dr. Taylor, thank you. This year, earlier, you released contractual services to the county council and to the board and to the general public. I'm just wondering, would that piece of information, I know we're structuring this completely different. However, if there's an increase and decrease on that chart of contractual service, I think there's a general interest out there that would like to know. So if we can provide that, that would be helpful in terms of our work being transparent. institution.
I think that's a great idea. And for the viewing public that's looking at this is something that even as a new superintendent coming to MCPS, trying to get my head wrapped around what we are doing internally and what we enlist the work of contractors or partners and consultants in that space has been really fruitful for me to get up to speed on and to have a better understanding. So to the extent that we can communicate what we were spending, what we plan to spend, and why, that's something absolutely we can do. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you so much. Now, as a reminder, our second work session will be held January 23rd, and the third one will be held on Monday, January 30, and then we have 2 budget hearings and 3 community engagement set up. So I encourage everyone to check out our website, and the notices will be going out. And thank you everyone for such an engaging conversation this morning. I look forward to more conversation on the budget. Thank you for the administration. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. That's unanimous with all of us. Meeting adjourned.